I'm personally a dungeon master who only likes to use traps sparingly and when it makes sense. But every once in a while, the urge creeps up to cause a little perception-dependent pain. But just tossing lumps of damage at your party isn't that engaging for your players. So the goal of today's encounter is to implement traps in a way that is fun for your players and isn't just a subtraction exercise. Hello, my name is Matt and welcome to My Hidden Nerdy Side, a channel created by a nerd who doesn't have many nerdy friends, and so I must rant to you, and today we're tackling the trap-laying dragon followers known as kobolds. We're going to take a look at their lore, info, and abilities, and then build an encounter you can steal, modify, and plop directly into your D&D games. Now, if you are well aware of the lore and mechanics behind kobolds, then feel free to pop on over to the timestamp right here so you can jump straight to the encounter itself. I'll leave a clickable version in the description below. Alright, let's take a look at kobolds. To make sure this video is a decent length, we'll only be pulling the kobold lore that exists within the monster manual, all of which can be found on page 195. However, we will be using stat blocks from Volo's Guide to Monsters, and there is a ton of great information in there about kobolds. So check out these pages for more info on kobolds if you're hankering for ideas. So kobolds are reptilian humanoids that tend to worship evil dragons and serve them loyally. However, dragons are not the most common of creatures, so other than dragon lairs, kobolds can more likely be found in dungeons or other areas where they can hoard and defend their trinkets and treasure. Kobolds are egg-laying creatures who mature quickly and can live over 100 years old. However, the majority of kobolds die before the age of 10, either to predators or because of their own physical weakness. Because kobolds are such weak creatures vulnerable to prey, they tend to band together to survive and overwhelm their enemies with sheer numbers. That being said, another way kobolds defend themselves and their loot is with traps. Yes, kobolds are famous in the Dungeons & Dragons community for their trap-making skills, taking the lives of many player characters in the decades this game has existed. Despite kobolds not being the most intelligent creatures, kobolds do create particularly clever traps, which they litter all over their territory. These traps tend to use the terrain, natural hazards, and even other creatures, whatever it takes to get the job done. Now, in traditional D&D lore, kobolds hate gnomes and hate pranks. This goes back to a long time ago when the god Kurtlemak, a lesser god the kobolds worship, served as Tiamat's vassal in the Nine Hells. However, one day Garl Glittergold, a gnome god, stole one of Tiamat's prized trinkets. Kurtlemak was given the job of retrieving the trinket, but Glittergold tricked him and ended up trapping Kurtlemak in an underground maze for eternity. And so to this day, kobolds despise all gnomes. And there are even a few kobolds who dedicate their lives to try and find a way to free Kurtlemak from Glittergold's maze. And finally, sometimes kobolds can be born with wings, and these wings are seen as a gift from Tiamat. A winged kobold is called an Erd, and wingless kobolds, although envious, don't get along very well with Erds. So taking a look at their actions and abilities, which can also be found on page 195 of the Monster Manual, there isn't too much to dive into. But it does get a bit spicier when you look at their additional stat blocks in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which can be found on pages 165 to 167. Now, combining both books together, there are 5 kobold stat blocks, so we are just going to speed run through the interesting stuff in each one. Every kobold has sunlight sensitivity and pack tactics, so using them indoors or on cloudy days and tossing a lot of them at your party at once is the best way to get the most out of them. Your general kobolds use daggers and slings, but feel free to give them whatever you want. Winged kobolds can fly and drop rocks on people's heads, and kobold dragon shields have multi-attack, gain resistance to the damage type of the dragon they worship, and have a very interesting ability called Heart of the Dragon. When a dragon shield is frightened or paralyzed, it can make its saving throw at the start of its turn rather than the end. And if it succeeds, all kobolds within 30 feet of it break free of the effect and gain advantage on their next attack. Kobold inventors have a range of things they can do, from throwing pots of rock grubs at your players to having skunks spray them. They are really fun, but I think the best way to utilize them is to look at what they do and then pick a few things you like or homebrew a few things that fit that vibe. This helps cut down on your prep time and allows you to tailor your kobold inventors to your party. And finally, kobold scale sorcerers are spellcasters that have access to the heightened spell and subtle spell features. Feel free to add any other sorcerer types of casting, and I recommend taking their spell list and changing the effects to match the dragon they worship if they have one. For example, they have access to Scorching Ray, but if your Kobold sorcerer follows a blue dragon, maybe change the rays and damage type to lightning so their flavor better suits their master. So a quick homebrew change before we begin, and it's to the Kobold Dragon Shield to give it a bit more flavor. Since they are kobolds with a massive shield, I think making one of their attacks a shield bash could be a fun mechanic to add. It would deal 1d8 plus 1 bludgeoning, but if the target fails a DC 13 strength check, they fall prone. This allows your dragon shield to follow up with a spear attack with advantage. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basic kobold lore, info, and abilities, let's start crafting an encounter. This encounter/quest will be aimed at parties level 6 to 10 depending on how difficult you want to make it, and last 1 or 2 sessions depending on how much you want to stretch it out. The party's motivation should always be tailored to the campaign, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say there's something or someone the kobolds have captured, and the party will receive either monetary and/or quest-related compensation. Now, I've actually ran a version of this encounter with my group, and a fun addition I added was the person who hired them, who was also traveling with them, said he would double their reward if they accomplished their goal while remaining undetected. Adding something like that to your game could really help intensify the importance of avoiding these traps. It's not necessary, but something to think about. So this little quest can take place wherever, in the mountains, the desert, a forest, etc. But just to keep things simple, we're going to say it takes place in a swamp. And since it's taking place in a swamp, the dragon the kobolds serve is a black dragon. So there will be a faction that is also located in the swamp, and they will hire the party to retrieve whatever you decide they need to retrieve. And what that something is will be located in a kobold camp. The camp will be far away, and the faction who hired the party will offer them mounts to make the travel time faster. The party will be told they can take the mounts up there to reduce travel time, but eventually the area will become too wet and mushy, and so it's recommended they ditch their mounts when they reach a lake littered with logs. Your party can walk on the logs to get across, but the mounts obviously can't since the logs will be too narrow. So why give your party mounts at all rather than just making the kobold camp closer? Well, we'll get to that later. As your party travels to the kobold camp, they will encounter some traps along the way. What kind of traps? Well, there are several kinds. There are your typical traps that do damage immediately. There is nothing wrong with this kind of trap, but if this is the only kind of trap you have, the experience can start to feel dull since there isn't any further interaction with the trap other than trying to spot it and possibly taking damage. But again, having 1 or 2 of these traps is totally fine, and can help make future encounters more challenging by going into them with lower HP. One example of this is something we're going to steal from my Black Dragon video, which is acid landmines. The kobolds have borrowed their dragon's acid and weaponized it so if a player steps on one, it will explode. Of course, just having it lying around would be too easy to spot, so they'll hide them underneath some moss, pebbles, dirt, or even in the water. Another type of trap is one that does damage but not immediately, giving your players a brief opportunity to do something before they are hit. These traps are a bit more engaging since your players get to think about how to avoid them after they are sprung. For example, say in the swamp there is a random pathway made from cubes of stone. The pathway is 60 feet wide and 90 feet long, and there is nothing but marsh on either side of the stone, leaving the pathway as the obvious choice. When your players walk through it, there will be a few pressure plates lying around. If your party steps on one, the pressure keeping the stone cubes in place will start to loosen, revealing the fact your party is standing over a 30-foot tall pit of acid. The cubes are falling into the pit, creating a domino effect making its way to the party, and they have to react immediately or they'll fall in. Now your players have to think about what they'll do. Do they try and run to the very end? Do they try and run off the side? Do they try and cast Misty Step or Dimension Door someone away? Ask them to make any athletics, acrobatics, or whatever check necessary to accomplish what they want to accomplish. But make sure they make that decision quickly, and if they don't, it's fine to say they don't react fast enough and simply fall in. The world doesn't always stop because the players do. Another type of trap is one that doesn't do any damage at all. For example, an alarm. Maybe one of your players nicks a tripwire and a flare shoots up into the sky, alerting all the kobolds in the area. Now your party has to act fast and decide whether they want to hide, fight what's coming, or whatever else. Or maybe they trip a wire and see the wire start recoiling quickly on top of the water further and further into the distance and don't see what the trap activates. You as the DM know it's an alarm, but your party now has to question and fear the possible outcome. You can also have traps that spark mini combat encounters. For example, maybe there is an obvious pit filled with swarms of rock grubs about 30 feet wide and 20 feet deep. Your party can walk around it with ease and continue onward, but then 30 feet away there's a secret mini catapult-like contraption underneath some moss, and when it's stepped on, it flings one of your players back into the pit. You could also have guards patrolling the area that can spot your players, and better yet, if your players capture one of these guards, maybe they can interrogate them and squeeze out some information about how to detect the other traps. There are several other types of traps, like traps that can be stopped by solving a puzzle, traps that when tripped start a timer and the trap goes off after a certain time, and on and on and on. But you can create a decent kobold encounter by sprinkling around what we just mentioned. And remember, you can have multiple tiers to your traps, and parts of those traps can be easier to detect than others. For example, a player rolls a 16 on perception and it takes a 15 to see a tripwire in the middle of a road. Maybe they just step over the trap, or maybe they walk around it. Well, you could have buried acid landmines on either sides of the tripwire that require a 20 or more to see. Building your traps like this will shock your players at first, but it will also make them much more careful the next time they spot a trap without rolling a natural 20. And also remember that alarms and patrols are not the only way your party can be caught. All the traps I've mentioned so far have the potential to make a lot of noise, so you'll have to decide just how noisy they are. But anyways, we've talked a lot about traps, but what happens after your players pass the traps? Well, there will be a small kobold camp with a cave in the middle of it. Your party will notice the variety of kobolds you have decorated throughout the encampment, but won't be able to spot what's inside the cave without seeing it for themselves, using magic, etc. However, looking around, make it clear they can't spot what they're looking for, and the only place they can't see into is in the cave. Therefore, whatever they are looking for is probably in there. And what's inside the cave other than what they're looking for? A young black dragon. This dragon will be sleeping, and from the information the faction has told the party, it clearly won't be the big evil dragon the kobolds worship, but one of its offspring. Another thing your players will notice are a few kobolds riding large dragon-like creatures that I call riding drakes. They'll look like 8-foot long dragons, but have no wings. Basically, just take the Black Dragon Wormling stat block, knock its AC down to 14, its HP to 20, remove its flying speed, up its movement speed to be the same speed as the mounts your party rode in on, make their swimming speed equal to their movement speed, remove its acid breath, and boom, there you go. So what will your party do? Will they just storm the camp? Will they try and lure the kobolds away with a distraction? Will they try and stealth away what they're looking for? Or something completely different? Who knows? But after the party gets what they came for, they'll start to head back the way they came until they reach the Lake of Logs and eventually their mounts. Now, I have alluded to the fact there was a reason we gave your party mounts. Well, here's that reason. Because as your party makes their way to their mounts, they'll hear disturbances in the water and they'll see kobolds on riding drakes swimming through the swamp and heading their way. That's right, it's chase sequence time. So the reason this chase sequence is kicked off is because the young black dragon woke up from its nap and noticed what it was guarding was gone. Then the patrols reported certain traps being sprung that led in the direction your party came from, and there you go. Now, if your players have done something that would prevent this, then there won't be a chase sequence, and that's okay. You also don't have to have a chase sequence, but I think it adds a bit of fun tension after the fact so long as your party isn't limping away with a hit point apiece, because then you're just TPKing them. The kobolds on riding drakes will chase them on land, and some winged kobolds and scale sorcerers will swoop in from above, along with a young black dragon who will rain acid down on your party, if he's still alive of course. Talk about how your party darts into the tree line, and the plethora of trees blocks the dragon and flying creatures from attacking them, and the kobolds on riding drakes can do nothing but follow, allowing your party to ride on untouched for a while. But eventually, the tree line will end and there will be a huge stretch of open field with the next tree line hundreds of feet away, allowing the flying creatures to engage, and now the real meat of the chase begins. You could also have some kobolds on riding drakes swoop in from the side rather than solely chase them from behind to stop your players in their tracks and add a bit more tension. Then, after a few rounds, add the cherry on top. About 100 feet away, your party sees the faction that hired them brandishing swords, bows, and other weapons coming to assist your party. They heard the roaring of the dragon from miles away or saw the flares go off, and so they suited up to come cause a distraction so the party can retreat into the nearest tree line with the goods they received. Now your party can keep on going with what they retrieved or stay back and engage in an all-out battle. I'm thinking within the Kobold camp, depending on how difficult you want to make it, we have about 6 to 15 regular kobolds, 2 to 5 winged kobolds with short bows, 2 to 4 kobold dragon shields, 1 to 3 kobold inventors, 1 to 3 kobold scale sorcerers, and of course the young black dragon. I'd also say 2 to 4 of the regular kobolds are on top of riding drakes. So all in all, not enough where it's a guaranteed TPK, but enough where it's challenging and makes the party think twice about just barging in the front door. Then, during the chase sequence, if you choose to run it, we have roughly 1 to 3 scale sorcerers, 2 to 5 winged kobolds with short bows, and the young black dragon in the sky. On the ground, we could have roughly 4 to 10 regular kobolds on riding drakes, and the faction who hired your party could consist of anywhere between 10 to 20 soldiers using the guard stat block, enough to give your party the confidence to make any decision they like. So, creative traps, stealth options, tons of potential combat, a chase sequence, and more, all in only a couple of sessions? I mean, this scenario is already spicy enough, but if we wanted to, how could we make it even spicier? Well, if you wanted to be particularly evil, you could sprinkle traps within the swamp during the chase sequence, giving your players yet another thing to worry about. You could also have a big bad kobold riding on top of a young dragon, raining magic down on your party as they try to escape. And finally, if your players kill the young dragon, well, they are going to piss off its mommy or daddy, giving you a clean and easy way to integrate a future ancient dragon encounter later on in your campaign. But of course, these are just some of the many ways you can use kobolds in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. There are tons of different ways to take this encounter and spice it up, so please let me know what you would do in the comment section below so I can nerd out over it and smack myself in the head for not thinking of it. Also, let me know if there are any creatures that you would like me to build an encounter for in my future videos. I'm going to try and put out at least one of these videos a week, so feel free to subscribe and share this video around if you liked it, and stay tuned for upcoming content. Thanks for watching and indulging my hidden nerdy side.